So as far as the conception of the collaboration, we've been thinking a little bit about how that's actually changed. We began this in January, and we've looked at how it's changed over time. I don't know if you want to say a bit about that.
Yeah, well, I really didn't see it as a collaboration to begin with as much as a conversation, and a conversation that might continue and might play itself out pretty quickly. In science, there's a lot of structure to collaborations, and often a pretty hierarchical structure. And the kinds of relationships which exist in collaborations are pretty formalized, and in fact often have names. And there wasn't any sort of structure like that to this collaboration, because it's a collaboration between a scientist and an artist. So we're really working at defining the relationship and the nature of collaboration when it's across disciplines of this kind, and even the mode of collaboration. And so my assumptions at this point is that we are equals in this process, in control of the process, in the sort of power of the process, but very different in what we bring to it and how we influence it.
And so for me, it's changed over time as well. Some things have changed, and yet I also acknowledge that some things have actually stayed the same from my mental conception when I first came to it. It's actually interesting. I keep a lot of notes. It's a bit like a lab log book, but it's my sketchbook. And I've kept a lot of notes over the course of the process so far. It's interesting to see over time how I digest the science, how they digest the art, the interactions between us, how they've changed and morphed over time, as you've heard a bit. And also notes on sort of related historical work, really giving context to this process. Lots of things change, conversations, relationships. This is all evolving, which is what we sort of expected in this idea of social sculpture. And early musings on directions, some of them seem really plausible and in fact very necessary. Some seem completely ludicrous. And some core considerations emerge again and again and again, and those are the things that we end up revisiting. So the goals of this residency, we're often asked, are we looking for a work of art, an exhibition, new science, something else? What is the end result? What's the product? And I think Irina talked about this a bit too. Where is the art? Where is the science? Instead of focusing from the outset on the creation of artworks or scientific results or exhibitions of either flavor, we're most interested in setting up this situation in which people from both fields come into regular contact with one another. And as C.P. Snow said, creative chances would happen. So this social sculpture in which art, practice, and science research come into contact to sort of knock heads and to learn to describe the chasm in between, reshaping the trajectory of each practice and the mental space of each practitioner. And along the way, evidence, physical works, either science or art, and documents of this social sculpture work will occur, but more like the artifacts of a culture that you're now seeing from the outside, rather than the central focus as a product.
Yeah, so my goals really are quite open-ended with this. There's a philosopher of science named Robert Brandon who's spent a lot of time thinking and writing about natural selection and what natural selection is and how it works. And he talks about, say, a population which is undergoing natural selection as something he calls a chance setup. And evolution occurs through a multitude of these chance setups. And the events that occur within that population, along with the events which are partially chance, determine the fate of that. And to the extent that those characteristics of the population are inherited, and to the extent that they're successful, that population continues. This is a chance setup, in my view. And long term, the goal is to understand why art and science work in such different ways and how they together make possible a fuller understanding and participation of the world. And we set up this chance and we let it unfold.
So other people will ask, in addition to products of the collaboration or the nature of it, what we hope to gain. And for me, a changed art practice, which may inform more widely my field. And also interesting ways of characterizing the space that separates the two fields. We're actually becoming really interested in not simply saying, well, mashing them together, but describing that space that separates them. And with this new characterization of that space, we may find new modes of engagement. And from that new understanding of the world, kind of mirroring what Steve said, a new understanding of the world and what it means to be fully human in it.
And I think usually my answers are shorter than yours. And in this case, what I expect is fuller consciousness, first of all, a better ability to think, and as a result, greater success in science.
So I think an ongoing question always in these sorts of collaborations is, for the artist perhaps, is what is it like trying to understand the science? And for me, it was challenging at first when I started coming to the lab meetings and going to talks by the lab members and invited speakers. And a former grad colleague of mine, who's a biochemist, told me to expect that it would be difficult at first, and to imagine this as an experience in a foreign country, where I'm going to be learning a new language and I'm going to be learning a new culture. And if I could go into it with that mentality, it would get a lot better over time, but it would take time. And it has gotten better. And I do really follow a remarkable amount. And at this point, I can even give a passable elevator speech for the work of each member in the lab. So if you want to chat about that, I can tell you what they do.
It's pretty impressive, actually. Yeah. So Natalie asked me, is the science easy or hard to understand? Or, well, she asked me both those things. And I think the same answer for me applies to both. And it's really a paraphrase of Han Shan, translated by Gary Snyder in Cold Mountain Poems. People ask the way to Cold Mountain. Cold Mountain, there's no through trail. How did I make it? My method's not the same as yours. If your method was like mine, you'd get it and be right here.